This last panel is here to talk a little bit about how the themes that Melissa hit around transparency, leverage, validation, and if you can't be a funder, be a customer. If you can't be an investor, be a customer, have played out in places outside of DC. Because again, the idea being that while DC has many great companies, we don't have a monopoly on the best ideas.
That's embarrassing.
That's somebody who agrees. They're like, yeah, that's so right. So we have the now famous Mac Conwell, director of the Minority Business Pre-Seed Fund at TEDCO. We have Patti Glaza, who is the managing director at Invest Detroit. We have John Gavigan, executive director of 43 North in Buffalo.
Yep.
Melissa's all about Buffalo today.
Damn, I didn't hear that one.
And Stefanie Thomas, who is the senior associate for investments at the Impact America Fund, which is based here in DC. So Mac, you got name-checked a couple of times.
Okay.
Tell us about how TEDCO addresses some of the challenges that we heard from our DC venture-backed business, particularly focusing on how you leverage existing funds and public funds.
Okay, well, I'll start off giving a quick background about TEDCO, right? So TEDCO stands for the Maryland Technology Development Corporation. This organization has been around since 1998. It was originally a grant organization to help commercialize companies that were licensing technologies from our research institutions. Over the last 20 years, we've turned into a funding institution, and so we are the largest funder of early stage tech companies in the state of Maryland. We do 40 to 50 seed deals every year across multiple different funds, right? So we have a cybersecurity fund, a life science fund, a general technology fund, a gap fund for companies that have already raised their seed and try to get to a Series A, and then we have the Maryland Venture Fund, and all of those are in one bucket, right? They all work together to define these seed deals and these venture deals, and those checks go anywhere from $100,000 to $2 million. But then, I guess about 2 years ago, TEDCO did this internal research to find out how they were doing and what the thought was from the community, and they found out they weren't investing in enough African-American-led startups, but when African-American-led startups applied for funding, they got funded at the same rate. So it was this big question of why aren't we getting more black and brown founders applying for funding? And so TEDCO did what we always tell entrepreneurs to do. We talked to our customers. We had 2 listening sessions to meet with the constituency and find out what they thought. And they were very honest and open and difficult conversations, very tense conversations. And to TEDCO's credit, they took the time to listen. They weren't trying to defend themselves. They weren't trying to say, whoa, we do this, we do that. It was none of that. They really took the time to listen. And 3 things came out of that. You don't look like us, you don't market to us, and I don't have access to friends and family capital to even get to the point where I have enough traction to be competitive for seed investment. And TEDCO's like, okay, that's interesting. So you don't look like us and you don't market to us. We took care of that. Out of 10 key hires last year, 3 of them were African Americans, 2 were African American women. My colleagues, Angela Singleton, who's a phenomenal, successful entrepreneur, has an MBA from Yale. Tammy Thomas, our chief marketing officer, who's an executive at TEDCO, who's also the former chief of staff of Bowie State, and also worked at UMBC when they launched their cybersecurity incubator. 2 very phenomenal women, and then there was myself, right? And with Tammy being our chief marketing officer, she deals with making sure our message gets out there to all demographics across the state of Maryland. But then this thing about friends and family money, right? That it was a sticking point there. And so keep in mind, we get most of our funding from the state of Maryland. We get about $20 million every year from the state of Maryland to invest in these startups. And we were trying to come up with this idea of how we do a program for, address this friends and family round. And what came out of it was this Minority Business Pre-Seed Fund, which is actually a partnership with Harbor Bank being a black-owned bank in Baltimore, who is currently becoming more active in the local tech community in Baltimore and across the region. And so they are a 50-50 partner with us. So now you have funds coming from the state of Maryland and funds coming from a local bank to put together this program where we're going to take 10 African-American-led startups over this fiscal year and give them $40,000. But here's where the unique part comes in. You can be as early as the idea stage all the way to the prototype stage. So literally you can have idea down on a piece of paper, all the way up to you have a prototype, you have some customers, but you don't have enough traction for that seed investor to be like, I'm ready, right? And what's come out of that is we've done 2 rounds of funding so far. We've funded 6 companies. 5 of them have been African American women led. We finally got one guy, so it worked out. And they're phenomenal companies. And what we found through the applications is we've gotten almost 120 applications every cycle we've done. We've done 3 cycles to this point. It's been 320 applications across all 3 cycles, right? And so there's demand there. And we're seeing a lot of great ideas. But the thing that we took the stance on was, I decided we weren't going to care about traction, or how far you were. What we cared about was how unique was your idea? Like, is this something I haven't heard 20 times already? And does it have the potential to be a large outcome? So if it's a really unique idea and has the potential to be a large outcome, well, that's interesting. And we find that the entrepreneurs we're investing in are doing things that are just really unique, right? And they're unique because they're so passionate, and it comes from a place of where they feel like they were marginalized. So I'll give you an example. We recently funded a company called PYT Fund. So a lot of people here in the area know PYT Fund. Stacy's been around, right? And so we just gave Stacy some money, but the premise behind the idea of, you go crowdfund money for school, and we know you're not going to get enough money to pay for your semester, but then we're going to take that money and leverage it to get you a low interest loan from Sally Mae, and we'll get an origination fee on the backside. That's different. And then when you ask her what made you come up with that, she's like, well, when I went to school to pay for school, I went into the military, and they paid for me to go to school. My sister, when she went to school, she went into a bunch of debt. So today, I'm doing fairly well for myself, and I'm starting this company, and my sister's still trying to get out of that college debt. So there's got to be a way to fix that. Well, that's a powerful story. That's an amazing entrepreneur. Why is she running around? The only way she can really get funding is Wednesday, Tuesdays here and there, and a bunch of pitch competitions and accelerators, right? Because that's what we have to do. That's what I did when I was an entrepreneur. You go to the pitch competitions, you go to accelerators, you try to pull this money together because no investor's ready for you yet, and you try to make it work. But I think there's a model where we can invest earlier and help de-risk these companies.
So Stefanie, I think a lot of the companies that Impact America Fund has invested in also have that particular market niche driven by experience. So can you talk a little bit about what your fund looks for in a company, and how you work on that notion of validation?
Sure. So at Impact America Fund, we really believe that there are a lot of sort of hidden opportunities embedded in communities, typically underserved communities across the country. So you think about where VC dollars are flowing, the largest cities, reflect New York, Boston, and the Bay Area, right, and Silicon Valley. And so how do we sort of move the needle to reallocate venture capital in a way that identifies companies that can scale pretty quickly, but also are really solving big problems that we know innovators in these communities have had ideas about for a very long time. They just needed opportunity and access to infrastructure that can support their growth. And so with our fund, we're really focused on tech-enabled, tech-based platforms that are looking to scale solutions for low to moderate income groups and underserved groups in the US. We're thinking about how impact can play out from sort of an economic justice narrative around participation. So not just giving people access to high quality goods and services, but what is the participation rate across the value chain in a particular industry, and why does it look the way that it looks, and how can technology sort of disrupt some of that to create more opportunities for people to generate wealth and actual income that's sustainable over time. And so how we think about sort of the type of companies we want to invest in, we're looking for entrepreneurs who typically, have some lived experience within the problem context that they're solving for. A lot of them, the issues are very personal to them, similar to what Mac talked about with Stacy and PYT. We also look for entrepreneurs who can couple that experience and that empathy around the issues with a business savviness, how to really build a thoughtful business model that can be profitable at scale, and that can also have inherent impact in it, so that there's not tension between them making a difference in the community and then being able to be a sustainable going concern as a business.
So Patti, one of the things that you and I have talked about previously is this notion of metrics, and Mac hit on that as well, right? He's not looking as much at the typical metric, but is that a really interesting idea, and is there a large outcome potential? Talk about some of the metrics that you are either using or searching for at Invest Detroit for your fund, and you can spend some time describing the fund.
Sure. So Invest Detroit, we've been investing since 2010, from early seed to late seed. We are coming up on our 100th investment. A large part of that funding coming from New Economy Initiative, especially at the beginning. From a metrics perspective, and I heard what the entrepreneurs were saying from the last panel, and I know it's a struggle, but we have to put in context, especially what Mac was saying in terms of the volume of deals we look at. And if we see 500,000 deals in a year, and put it in context, we received close to 150 applications for our latest fund just in the first couple months. And so what we have to look at the team, and similar to, do they have experience with the problem? Do they really understand the industry they're working in? Are they leaders? So we know early stage companies can't have big teams. You don't have the money. But are you selling a vision where you're able to attract a lot of talent around you as advisors, as people willing to work for equity, as people who are just like, okay, I'm ready to jump on board as soon as you're ready to go. So are you a leader, and really are you selling your vision to other people outside of investors, right? We have to look at metrics from and every industry is different, right? So with user-based, if it's a user-based model, I do have to look at how many users you have. Now, I don't really care exactly, is it 50 or 100, but I do care, are those 50 super engaged? Are they coming on your platform every day? Are they doing a lot of activity? Or, and was it 10 yesterday and it's going to be 100 tomorrow? So I do have to see growth. I have to understand what it's going to take to scale. For our funds, what we're charged with is how do we help these companies get to that next round of funding? That A round of funding is looking for $1 million in revenue, and the B round of funding is looking for 5. So how do we, can our little bit of money get you that far enough along to get to that next hurdle, or are we going to strand you? And so we really try to be purposeful and about not stranding our companies. So from a metrics perspective, I look at it is, can the company achieve what it needs to do with our funding, and if there's anything else around the table to get to really that, $500 to $1 million in revenue that then typically enables the next round.
Do you get money from the state of Michigan, or is it entirely philanthropic or other sources?
It depends on the fund. So we've got 3 funds. 2 of the funds have a little bit of state money. Yeah.
So, John, we've got Maryland, we've got Detroit, we've got Impact America Fund has an Oakland base and a DC base. So Oakland, a little bit of that valley slosh coming over the bridge. But how do you create that kind of entrepreneurial venture investment? How do you make a name for yourself in a place that is underserved by venture capital? And is there a role for government in doing that, in putting a place on the map as a venture magnet?
Well, to answer your first question, I can't remember from the first panel, but somebody said intention and being intentional. And I think that is the key word. I love the fact that Melissa was like, be careful of the data. I think we're dated to death, to be honest with you. I mean, we all know the data. It's hard. If 1% of all startups actually get funding, that's tough, whether you're a white dude, a Hispanic male, or a black female. It's hard work to be an entrepreneur, but that's what makes it rewarding and great. So intention, I think, is probably the key word, at least for me. It's the aha statement of today. And yes, government can support that. Fortunately, we have a very progressive governor in New York. His name's Andrew Cuomo, and yeah, right, Bernadette, there you go. You and I are connecting after this conference, that's for sure. Going to do a lot of hugging tonight. So we have a very progressive governor. He had realized, and most of you know Buffalo, and you have certain perceptions of Buffalo. It's 1.1 million people in the Erie, Niagara counties, and there's about 260,000 people in a very dense city center, right? And for 70 years, it had, a lot of economic blight. It was a very dense manufacturing community, lost a lot of jobs. We had lost a culture of entrepreneurism over a span of 70, 75 years. But so many cultural assets and so much great industry, we were the original city of light. So if you think just about clean energy coming out of the, Niagara Falls and putting light bulbs in downtown Buffalo, it started in Buffalo, right? So we were the original Silicon Valley, if you will. The reality is we gave
Detroit's going to fight you on that one.
What's that?
Detroit's going to fight you on that one.
Detroit's our partner in crime, for crying out loud. But nevertheless, so the governor wanted to make a statement, right? So he said, we're going to revitalize this city center. And he got through our legislature $1 billion of investment for economic development. And a portion of that money went to rebuilding an inclusive culture of entrepreneurism in our community. And as a result, we've taken the money and built out certain strategies recommended by the Brookings Institute or McKinsey or the Kauffman Foundation, et cetera. And we started building programming around how to deploy that capital. And it kicked off with a $5 million startup competition in the city of Buffalo. We award $5 million to 8 companies that hail from around the world, mostly in North America. And so some of the entrepreneurs I would expect to be in that competition I'd seen here today, and which would be great. But we do very intentional outreach to an inclusive set of entrepreneurs from around North America. We reach out to them, whether it's coming to the Aspen Institute or engaging with organizations from around the country to find great entrepreneurs that can become applicants. This year, and alongside that, which is scalable tech companies, the life sciences, consumer products, et cetera, alongside of that, we developed another program because we had garnered a very good brand for being a great competition. We're going to be launching our 5th one in January. That we built out a Western New York startup competition exclusively for minority founders and founders of diverse backgrounds. And because the state was the seed money, if you will, in our initiative, the local community galvanized around that, was catalyzed around that to actually create this inclusive Western New York-based competition, which is solely funded by the private sector, which we're really proud of. So out of 15 companies that we made investments in or chose for investments, if memory serves, it was 8 men, 7 female, and it was 4 Caucasian, 7 African American, and 5 minority, other than the Caucasian or African American. So, but how did that work? It was intentional. We show up to churches. We show up, if social media, if Snapchat isn't relevant on the east side neighborhoods, then we'll put posters in bus stops. So you have to go where the puck is, right? You got to reach on the terms of the people that you're trying to connect with. And that may look very different from one demographic to the next, but I'm proud to say that we're finally making some real traction, I believe. And it started, and I'm sorry to see that the deputy mayor is no longer here.
I think she's just on the other side of the door. I hope she comes back.
She knows all about you, Tom.
But quite frankly, it was catalyzed by the government, and now the private sector is starting to take over.
Great. So, Stefanie, talk to me a little bit about that, because you are a private sector entity. What does the government need to, local government, state government, because the benefit of DC is it's all in one. What does local and state government need to do to tee up the kinds of deals or the kinds of culture or the kinds of awareness that you and Impact America Fund can kind of amplify and draw on?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in terms of sort of public-private partnerships, but I will say some of the ways where I've seen results in sort of a more connected ecosystem is being able to tap into, organizations such as TEDCO, working with MAC. I've evaluated some of the applications that come through to give him more of a sense of what we look for in terms of what companies are investable at the level that we're looking at. And by the way, we're typically investing late seed stage, pre-Series A about 12 to 18 months out. So, similar to Invest Detroit, we're thinking about how to be a bridge towards more traditional VC money that is typically hard to come by. And so how are we translating opportunities that we're seeing in underserved group communities and bringing them into more of a mainstream conversation around longer term funding? For us, we also are connecting with local organizations that are on the ground. They understand what's happening, what are some of the big issues. They're also very connected to the entrepreneurs themselves. And so for those who have a tech element to the work that they're doing, we automatically become plugged into those individuals to make sure that we understand what the pipeline looks like. And a lot of times, we'll cut a check for a company, but it's after we've tracked them for a while. We want to get to know the entrepreneurs. We want to see that discipline around, how they're able to evolve in their thinking and learning as they're iterating on their business models. We also want to make sure the relationship is the right fit. We want to make sure that our dollars, because they are small, we're a $10 million fund. Our check sizes are, about $200, $250 to start. And for us, that it's catalytic, but it's not going to be enough when you're thinking about these Series A, Series B types of funding. And so, how can we be strategic in supporting them in ways that are not necessarily monetary, but are ones that can connect them to larger groups of resources, whether it's around hiring the right talent, whether it's around how to operationalize their business, whether it is expanding the pool of capital that they're looking at. A lot of times we have entrepreneurs who are very conscious around how their models are impacting community, but they're not thinking about how to talk about that impact narrative to impact investors or people who are in the social impact space who have dollars to bring to the table. When we're thinking about institutions, we're tied to government. We're thinking about potential funders of our own, fund. We have to be supported institutionally with dollars to be able to deploy that capital. And so how do we bring those pools of capital to the table who can take on more of that risk, who understand that they need to be market makers but may not know how to find the right entrepreneurs? Well, we are the ones who can find entrepreneurs. So we tell them, give us access to your capital and we'll know how to deploy it in the right way. And I think Mac's model is one example of that. We're building and finding more limited partners for our fund to be a bigger example of that. But we had to put a stake in the ground somewhere. And I think what we're learning in the private sector, as we have more of these types of convenings, we want to be able to share out what we're learning so that public and private can work better together.
Great. So, Mac, in some sense, you are the government because
we are the government.
You are the government.
It's a big title.
But do you work with cities? Or county level governments in Maryland? And if so, what do you tell them about the kinds of local culture that they can be creating and supporting?
So that's interesting, right? So TEDCO being the largest funder of early stage tech companies, and we're technically an economic development firm ourselves, right? So we go to all the economic development firm conferences and we know all these folks. And more, they're coming to us asking us, okay, we see tech's growing, this is something we need to be a part of. How do we grow that? What do we do? And so we're very intentional about helping other places around the state. We have a grant set aside for different counties around the state of Maryland to start incubators. So if you're launching an incubator, you can get money from TEDCO, whether it be a grant or a reverse, a grant that you can pay back to different counties around the state. We also give them money for events all around the state. We have a program called our Rural Business Innovation Initiative, where we specifically have mentors set aside in the different rural parts of the state of Maryland to help those entrepreneurs, right? Because the kind of technologies you see coming out of Southern and Western Maryland look very different than the technologies you see coming from Central Maryland, right? And so we are very intentional about doing that. And when we do that, we partner with those other parts of the state, those other economic development corporations. But then there's this other thing, right, where when you look at my fund, we take in applications from all over the state of Maryland. And a lot of these economic development firms have money set aside to do really creative things with low interest loans and have this money sitting around to help grow economic development, right? Well, we're starting to have the conversation now about how could they repurpose that to maybe leverage that towards some of the companies that come through our program. Like in Prince George's County right now, they have a pool of money set aside. So I'm like, hey, we have 2 entrepreneurs from Prince George's County who got funding from our program. Why don't you take an additional $20K out of your fund and give each one of them an extra $10,000? Well, that's an easy thing and an easy win for that economic development firm. It's not a heavy lift, right? And that starts the conversation. And we're starting to have more and more of those conversations.
You know, one of the things that Melissa has been sharp about keeping us focused on is what counts as a subsidy and who gets a subsidy. And I didn't want to tweet it, but you know, I'm thinking about how hard Baltimore and Montgomery County and DC are running after Amazon's headquarters. And I understand that there are very good reasons to do that, because Seattle was a burnt out industrial town before tech took root there. So I get it. But I do think it's really interesting to think about the abundance of money for some actors and the smaller, much smaller amounts of money that can leverage really important outcomes in the high growth space. And again, I understand why places are going after Amazon, but there's some kind of money that it's easy for places to put on the table and some kind of money that might be a lot harder for places to put on the table. And I think, I would hope that the cities that don't attract Amazon would kind of look at how much money they were going to put on the table and see if they could use it in other kind of generative and creative ways. Patti, quickly for you, when you talk to Detroit, you know, the government of Detroit and economic development entities, what are you telling them that you need for your own pipeline?
So there are three things that are really critical to, I think, success for entrepreneurship, not only in Detroit, but the region in general. Capital, no question. Just as much as the entrepreneurs want capital, we need capital to deploy. And there's certainly, we don't unfortunately have the $1 billion that New York does. So capital is one. Really and Pam alluded to this earlier, a really strong network of talent that mentors our companies. So we've got great technology in Michigan. We've got a lot of large research institutions. We've got, I think, the most engineer scientists per capita. I mean, it's crazy. We've got a lot of tech talent. But when it comes to marketing and sales, when it comes to scaling a business from 100 to 1,000 employees, we don't have that experience that's clamoring out of the woodwork to help our company. So we need more of that expertise added on, and then that investment really in the early stage entrepreneurs. So it takes time. So working on a company for 3 years before you're fundable is not a really long amount of time in reality. I know we hear these stories and we watch Silicon Valley and think that it should be a napkin and we're going to get $1 million, but it really doesn't work that way. It really takes most entrepreneurs a lot of hard work, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears before they finally actually get to that first investment. So really making sure we have the programs that are supporting them, helping them build the knowledge, build the network, and help them speak the language. That really is a foundation that has to be invested in.
Thank you. So I was an English major, and I'm just struck by never has a city profited so much from simple alliteration as Buffalo, right? $1 billion, right? If you started with an M, it would only have been $1 million, but you got the big bucks because of the B. Give me 2 non-financial things that government can do to support a culture of entrepreneurship, right? Because not everybody, as Patti said, is going to get the $1 billion. But what's 2 things that you think can support your work that are not dollar signs?
Well, I think, by the way, I want to go back to the billion just for a moment. It's unlocked $20 billion from the public sector. Just so we're clear.
From the public sector or from the private sector?
Or private sector. So another $20 billion has come on from the private sector. But it was the ignition that unlocked and catalyzed an entire renaissance, which is now far more collaborative, right? So, but somebody had to do it. Somebody had to place the bets first, right? And it turned out to be the state. What else can we do? I think building awareness is a really critical part, and also not only building awareness, but I love the discussion around educating and making sure that we have the right people surrounding young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs. It's really tough. I've had a bunch of them myself. Before I landed at 43 North, I had 5, and just like you guys, I was crying, trying to figure out new ways of tears and staying up till 1 in the morning every day, and put the babies down to bed, and then it was every single night till 1 o'clock in the morning. It's no different. And it's tough, but we can be empathic to each other. But the reality is that's just the way it is, right? Here's the issue. Number one, it is a viable way to create opportunities for yourselves and for your families. It is. That's the reality. But most people don't even know that it even exists, that the opportunities really exists. I can't presume to go into any of the neighborhoods or 10 different neighborhoods in my community and know how to fix their problems or address their challenges, but certainly the people that hail from those neighborhoods could do that if they were aware enough and had the means, potentially the means, to be able to go address those problems. So we spend a lot of time with the government and the private sector to create awareness. Last year we engaged with 4,000 high school students, most of them coming from neighborhoods, from underprivileged neighborhoods. But here's the other side of the coin. Not everybody should be an entrepreneur. That's the reality. Like, everybody wants money and everybody thinks, yeah, it's hard, it's frustrating, you're gonna cry, you're gonna get burnt out, you're gonna yada, yada, yada. It's life. But educating and surrounding aspiring entrepreneurs with the right resources and collaborating and connecting and networking, not even just within the community, but being here. Melissa asked me why I was here, and I'm very grateful. I was the only white dude on this, out of all the panels, by the way. Let the record be shown. But it is collaborating among each other, right? That in Steve Case, one of your favorite sons from the DC area, one of United States' greatest entrepreneurs, right? Rise of the Rest and Case Foundation, etc. He said the next wave, has anybody read The Third Wave? Hopefully everybody in this room has read The Third Wave, and it came from one of your own. But the next wave of innovation is going to be coming out of new collaborations and new partnerships. So it isn't just a DC issue, but it's connecting with Invest Detroit, or Mac and I getting together and talking about what's working in Maryland, and seeing whether or not there's any synergies in Western New York, or Invest America, like whether it's in Oakland or Buffalo, it's still a problem, right? Inclusivity, and if we're going to optimize the true potential of our neighborhoods, our communities, and this country, then we need to really optimize the true potential of all people. So, and I don't think any one community, frankly, is going to be able to solve this problem. I think that it is going to have to be a far more holistic, initiative. So, how about that for a quick answer?
That's good. But now I'm going to be tougher than I normally am. I always say that.
Seems so nice. You're an English teacher.
English major.
English major.
I teach other things, I hope. But this notion, what's the one thing that people, one sentence, the one thing that you want people to leave this panel, to leave this room with? Stefanie, we'll start with you.
I would say for funders in particular, if you're mission driven, then it's a requirement that you feel build. So not just thinking about the silo that you occupy with your work, but extending outward from that and really understanding the ripple effects and how to really be a part of creating the right ecosystem that can make everything work. Because we can for our fund, we can focus specifically in sort of this late seed stage, but I need to understand what's happening at pre-seed and early seed, and then even behind us at Series A and B, and being able to get these companies to successfully graduate to the different stages of growth that they want to realize for their ventures. So I think we need to continuously think about the impact we're making in our own silo, but then how that expands out beyond us for the broader ecosystem itself.
John, one sentence.
If you're an ecosystem builder, be intentional. If you're an entrepreneur, go unafraid. You have one life. Make it work. Go unafraid. And I'm speaking directly to the one that said that it was really hard. Go unafraid. This is it. You got it. You seem really bright to me. And Bernadette, same thing. Well, she's not afraid, and you're clearly not afraid. Go unafraid.
Okay, Patti.
So I'm going to be a little provocative. We haven't talked about this, but I would argue that the current startup funding model is broken. We can fund, micro loans, and we can fund really super high-tech VC, but we can't fund the in-between. And they're models that have to be built to support good, strong growth companies that have impact in our communities and our regions that will be wonderful companies, but we don't have the funding model that exists today.
What is that range, just out of curiosity, in your mind? When you say that, what are the boundaries?
I would say it's probably somewhere between 300 and 2 million.
If only there was a place at the Aspen Institute that did research on funding models and options, and if only there were a funder in the room who had a relationship with them and that could fund that research. That'd be amazing. Mac, what you got?
So that's funny because Patti took what I was going to say, right? But really, if you're a funder, venture capital investing has been done the same way for a really long time with the same model. There are other ways to do it. And I don't know if those models exist yet or if people have tried them yet, but why aren't we trying different models? Why aren't we trying different ways of investing, different thoughts around it? I'd like to see more people come together and just come up with different ideas on how to run a venture firm. Or maybe you don't call it venture, maybe call it something else. But there are other models, there's other ways to do it. For earlier stage companies, for later stage companies, for all sectors of venture and investing. Why has it been done the same way for so long?
That's great. So Deputy Mayor Snowden was supposed to give some closing remarks, but I think she was so full of excitement and energy and new ideas that she just could not wait. She had to run back and tell mayor and council that she has got it figured out and they just need to start implementing. So I'm sure tomorrow we're going to hear all about that. But one of the things that I think has come through is something that Patti and Mac really just crystallized for us, which is for a field that tells a story about itself, that it is disruptive, that it is brave and crazy and courageous, it has relied too long on old patterns. And it's time for venture to, in some ways, take itself more seriously about breaking old models and busting boundaries and doing the things that are truly new and truly creative and truly original. So I appreciate this panel for bringing that to light. I also think that we have successfully convinced anyone who might have been a skeptic that DC has extraordinary entrepreneurial talent, that the city is solving problems that matter, and that just because we are not currently one of the hotspots for venture capital, that just means there are more opportunities for, again, brave and bold investors. And I appreciate that people in this room have heard about the importance of collaboration and coming together, because that is what is going to drive an ecosystem, and that's what's going to make what happened today have resonance outside this room, I hope, for these companies and for generation after generation of companies and entrepreneurs in the city.